So this is a completely different frame. The furnace was furnacing. It was too hot. So yeah, we just kind of moved everything, and actually this is way more comfortable. So this is great. And I'm gonna continue talking about all of the books I've read this year with you right now. I wanted to talk about this exciting project that I'm working on, which is an upcoming online book club. So I'm not really sure whether it'll be on Substack, which I will link below, I think I talked about it, or on some other medium, maybe Patreon, I'm not sure. But the concept is to, for at least every year, have a sort of like book club theme. And this year I want to focus on books on love, more centered on nonfiction. There might be a lot of novels as well. Some of the books this year that I've read center around that theme very much, as do good novels throughout time and history. Good old love is a topic that we never seem to tire about, which I guess is normal. But then there are some immutable things that seem to be recurring, and that is where the mystery lies, and that is why I like to investigate in those books, and I will be talking about them in a bit. If you want to get the deets when it's coming and all of that, I suggest highly that you subscribe to the Substack. So, because I also got bored, I was talking about all the books that I read in order from the beginning of the year, but now I kind of want to like just do it the other way around. I want to talk about the most recent book I've read. At this date of shooting is the 3rd of January, so the last book I read of the year. I'm going to start from there and do it on the other side. So let's get to it. An Elemental Thing by Eliot Weinberger. Eliot, thank you for this book. This was an amazing book. An Elemental Thing. I discovered this author in the Paris Review, and there was an interview of him, and I saw that he was an essayist. But as opposed to like the more personal kind of essays that I read, or more like politically inclined essays that I read, this one is more undefined. It's not really personal, although there are some personal wanderings in it. There's an essay about like all the people named Changs, for example, in China throughout history, about wrens, about seasons. One of my favorite chapters is called The Vortex, which is like a series of vignettes about how basically you have this recurring symbolism of the spiral, the vortex, and what that represents across time and religion and history. This was definitely one of my favorite books this year. I love these sort of random topics when you write essays, and yet they're so captivating because of the writing and the sort of astuteness of his description and his perception of things. Book I read before that was Borges, good old Jorge, This Craft of Verse. So it's his lectures. He actually did a series of lectures about poetry specifically, which is funny because I've actually never read his poetry. I've read a lot of his short stories, but none of his poetry. So it was really interesting to have his take on it. What can get tedious about writing about poetry, or poetry in general, to me, is when it gets overly academic and overly sort of analytical, because to me a poem and poetry is supposed to be felt, and sometimes you read it and you don't understand, which is why I liked it, because he was delivering the lectures in English, but he was exemplifying a lot of his points with poems that were in Spanish, which he translated. He was just telling us to focus on the sounds and the feeling that you get out of it. And I love that. And this is another good one to put on the books on writing pile. Andrew O'Hagan's On Friendship. I spotted this in the bookstore, and I remember I was like, I need to read that. I don't know, I'm a sucker for friendship books. Like essays on friendship, wanderings on friendship, novels that are centered on friendship or specific friendships between people more than romantic entanglements. To me, there's a sort of purity in the love between friends that is just priceless, and that is just sort of like seemingly even more pure than romantic and erotic love itself, although that obviously develops into some sort of form of friendship. This was beautiful. Andrew O'Hagan wrote one of my favorite books called Mayflies. So he's a Scottish, I believe, author, and Mayflies was actually also about friendship. I remember I cried when I read that a couple of years ago. It was about the friendship between two guys as they were growing up in college, and how life tends to push you in different directions and you drift apart, and that seems to happen to many of us, I suppose. The most significant encounters that you'll meet in your early life and how time and circumstances just put you on different paths, and however much you want to try to preserve that magic, sometimes a bit hard to connect. But this was a beautiful meditation on all things friendship. A lot of name dropping, I must say, if you're into the literary scene of the UK, but that didn't bother me. I kind of like a little bit of literary gossip, if you ask me. Engagement by Gun-Britt Sundström. This is a Scandinavian book. It's Swedish. It was published in the 70s. I had no idea of its existence until I stumbled upon it in the bookstore. I love these editions as well. I have talked about it extensively in the video of my favorite novels of the year. It is basically about a couple, Marina and Gustav, and how they are navigating coupledom from the point that they get together until the whole course of their love. They sort of have this constant meta-analysis of their relationship, why there are certain currents that seem to pass through them, why she seems to need distance when he has closeness, why when one loves more, the other retreats. Wandering is about how love works and how we are thrust into certain scripts, especially that. So there's a sort of cynicism in it, but there's this like wry sort of like aspect in her voice that is extremely charming. A self-awareness there that is biting, that is quite attractive, in contrast with her seemingly ceaseless complaints about her state in love and in relationships. This may be the kind of book that we should discuss in the book club. Should we tackle love? What Nails It by Greil Marcus. He is a prominent critic. I thought it was interesting. I read it in an hour. It's part of those Why I Write series that I like so much. I just love to peer into the minds of authors, especially I think that I tend towards novels a lot, or like novelists or writings about literature, but there's so many different kinds of authors, and that's why I wanted to read this book, and I liked it a lot. The Slicks by Maggie Nelson. Maggie Nelson. I'm kind of sad that I haven't read her most recent book, Still, On the Story of Her Mouth, because I have loved reading Maggie Nelson. She has expanded my mind. Again, she's also in the Paris Review interviews, but I couldn't pass this. It was very tiny. It's basically an essay. It's about Taylor Swift and Sylvia Plath and how they are connected, how these are women that are fetishized, that are idealized, very, very deeply idealized, and Maggie Nelson sort of explores the why of that and why it matters, and what makes them so unique, actually, and compelling, and what makes them figures that provoke. I think that I have always been sort of biased, not necessarily of Sylvia Plath, because to me at least her poetry is very obviously of excellent quality and just that's poetry, you know? But Taylor Swift, I admit, I'm not a Swiftie. I don't listen to her music. I feel sort of indifferent about her. I do have an opinion about excessive idealization, but then who am I to judge, because I kind of have that as well, just with books or with like authors. I am biased in a certain way, so I thought it was good to connect her with an author that I do admire, Sylvia Plath, although, you know, of course, let's not divulge and talk about her life, but this is again an interesting example of what it tells us about culture and ourselves, that we seem to have a sort of fetish or a very deep need to feel entitled to have an opinion on artists' personal lives, especially when it comes to women who are unapologetically being themselves, especially when it's very performative, when it's on stage. Inferno, Aileen Miles. This was an amazing novel. This was funny. Aileen Miles is a poet, and she talks about becoming a poet in New York in the 70s at the time of the Patti Smith and all that, and it was hilarious. I just listened to it on audiobook, and she narrates it, which is why I wanted to listen to it. It was just so funny and entertaining, and at the same time this queer awakening and this sort of self-deprecating humor that I found extremely charming. I highly recommend it. It's one of my favorites of the year. And then I read the Paris Review. I kind of got it. It's the first time I read it. I have it here, the Paris Review. This is where I discovered dear old Eliot and his essays. An amazing interview of Maggie Nelson as well. A lot of beautiful poetry and little pieces. And, 3 poems by Patricia Lockwood. One is Perfect Pussy. I don't know, it's pretty explanatory, this is the Paris Review. This one was fall 2025. And it was great, and I'm sold. I found myself I found myself The Last Dreams, a unique volume by the Nobel Prize-winning Egyptian author of Vivid Dreams and Nightly Wanderings Through Cairo by Naguib Mahfouz. This was a little fever dream. I had no idea of this author before. I had no idea he had once won the Nobel Prize. This was a beautiful discovery. Again, I found it at the bookstore. I like this sort of serendipitously encountering books at the bookstore, and this was one of them. I read it in an hour, or maybe less than an hour. It's basically a collection of little vignettes about this man's sort of dreams through Cairo at the night, and it all starts with I find myself in. So every little vignette starts with I find myself in, and you have this repetition, and you have this dreamlike quality to it, interspersed with photographs of the wife of an author that I really like, which I completely forgot who. Hisham Matar. Yeah, so Hisham Matar introduced it, and I read a book of his this year. I think I talked about it so far. I'm not sure I have. I think I have. And his wife took photographs, I think, of Cairo, and that was the edition, and I loved it so much. I read Heart the Lover by Lily King. This was one of my attempts to sort of get back into the mold of contemporary fiction and have something to read that I would just sort of not think about so much, and sort of like an easy read, a sort of like a page turner kind of book. I needed a beach read at the time. Things were a little bit heavy, and so I was like, I need something light and something like a silly little love story, and it was. I think I rated it like four stars, but because it was just enjoyable. But it's not something that I actually kind of completely forgot about the plot. I should sell this, actually. Because these are the kind of books that I know I won't reread, but it was good. I liked it. Ooh, and then because we want to get serious again, I read a little book about motherhood, which actually kind of a dark book. The Abandoners by Begonia Gomez Urzaiz. I really like this book. It's a journalist basically who was fascinated by women who left their children. Specifically, women who left their children to pursue artistic lives, specifically women who left their children who were writers. So among them you have Doris Lessing, Muriel Spark, which were very prominent novelists. And she also has this essay about the state of motherhood at the moment, mothers and people monetizing family life and their children on social media, which I thought was sort of an astute criticism of our time. Not something that you always like to read about, but very interesting for me to think about, and very interesting for me to contemplate about, just because I have been grappling with these questions, not because I want to leave my children, obviously, but because it is peculiar that a mother would decide to do something so drastic, because she herself obviously is a writer, she herself is a mother, and I guess that, well, she says it herself, that she was just kind of obsessed with these figures, because probably knowing herself the pull that she feels between being a good mother and having to perform maybe the good mother, and at the same time needing to do what she needs to do, which is to write. And these are questions that are good to assess. It makes you question judgment, especially, and why it seems to be a recurring thing, why it seems to be sort of almost a trope or an archetype. It makes you question the structures in which we live, which force women sometimes to make this choice. And perhaps it's not about the women themselves or the mothers themselves, or because they're bad or good, which is sort of a redundant, simplistic question. But maybe it's about more than that. Maybe it's about more forces that are at play, and the limits of energy and time, and how sometimes what you are pulled to do precisely is what stops you from showing up in the best way that you can. For all the mothers out there pursuing creative lives, this is a good book. South and West, Joan Didion, From a Notebook. This is just little essays that she wrote when she was on a road trip with her husband. This was no White Album, this was no Slouching Towards Bethlehem, but I still liked it, although I have neutral feelings about it thinking about it now. But I just like to think of myself as a Joan Didion completist, and so I will give myself a sticker for that. Susan Sontag, Reborn. Believe it or not, this is my first Susan Sontag. Her diaries from her early diaries from 1947 to 1963, particularly at a time where she was studying and she was still building herself up as the intellectual that she was going to become. Susan Sontag is one of the most prominent cultural critics, social critics, literary critics of America. I have actually a few of her books that I have yet to read. The only thing that I have a problem with, I think, while reading her diaries is how sort of cerebral she is. Kind of love the wisdom, the embodied wisdom more of certain other authors that are maybe, obviously, I'm thinking about Charles Bukowski, for example. Let's not go into the morality of who he was as a person, whatever, because that's not what I want to get into. I was just thinking in terms of the quality of the work. I liked her writing, I like her mind, but sue me, I feel like it's a bit too disembodied for me. It's a bit too intellectual. I don't know, I kind of dragged myself through this. I read a poetry collection by Louise Gluck, Vita Nova. I also want to be a Louise Gluck completist. She has written some of my favorite poetry collections. This is, I think, the 5th one I read of hers. I loved it. I loved all her poetry collections. What can I say? Maybe I'll read you a short stanza. Oh, zoo card of my daughter. Look, it's here. Oh, good to know. I feel like every time I talk about a poetry collection, I have to read a bit from it. Like, how can you know what it contains? Okay, just the beginning. You saved me. You should remember me. The spring of the year, young men buying tickets for the ferry boats. Laughter because the air is full of apple blossoms. When I woke up, I realized I was capable of the same feeling. I remember sounds like that from my childhood, laughter for no cause, simply because the world is beautiful. Something like that. That was nice. Well, that's just the beginning of the poem Vita Nova, which she opens the collection Vita Nova with. The Order of Time by Carlo Rovelli. I've been wanting to read this book for ages. I think like 5 years it's been shitting. It's been sitting on my shelf, and I think it's a bit intense. I need to be in the right mind space to read these books. Carlo Rovelli writes about physics and quantum physics in an approachable way. So, you know, basically physics for dummies, but in a poetic way. So, you know, it's kind of nice. And this was particularly about time, and I learned a lot of things, such as how time passes differently when you're closer to heat than when you're further away, and how at some point they've had to synchronize clocks. However, it's a very small book, so I feel like it didn't really touch on everything, but I think what got me to read this book finally was like I started to read it, and then I discovered that Benedict Cumberbatch was the one narrating the audiobook. So I was like, okay, I'll just read it while listening to Benedict Cumberbatch narrating the audiobook, and that made it very worth it. Let me tell you, that was good. That was a good call from them. Frank Sonnets. I don't think I read that much poetry, or at least finished a lot of poetry collections this year. I read a lot of poetry here and there, but I don't tend to finish them necessarily. And when I finish them in one go, it means that they're good. Dianne Seuss. It's the first time I read her. She's definitely one of my new favorite poets, new favorite contemporary poets. This is Frank Sonnets. It's just a bunch of sonnets. It inspired me to write my own sonnet, my own first sonnet. And I just absolutely loved it. There is no way I'm not gonna read something to you. Ooh, this is a good one. All lives have their tropes over which we have minimal control. Maybe beauty is your trope. That's a good one. Or maybe you're the ugly one. Not fun. You feel the eyes and learn to live with them. Or you're the princess rankled by the pea. Or the pea smothered under 10,000 mattresses and the princess on top like a heavy cherry. Who am I to judge the framing of a life? What if birds are it? All your birthdays, gifts birds related. A special thing for red-haired ones that peck ants out of dead trunks. Or earning abs and biceps, controlling your relentless hungers. A closet full of tiny sleeveless dresses in all the pastel shades of after-dinner mints. Maybe you're marked as Maudlin, or the one who marks others as Maudlin with a big fat pen. Or a couple hundred years ago, your people were owned. Or your people owned people. Your people were burned. Or your people lit the match. The evils wriggle through the generation like corpse worms. My great-great-grandfather beat to death a plow horse in a field of grain. No wonder everything since has reeked of peasantry and pain. It's so nice actually to read sonnets, because that's the point of it, right? That they're written in iambic pentameter, and so you have this beautiful rhythm and it sounds like something spoken, and I like that. Audition, Katie Kitamura. Again, sometimes I like to balance with a bit of contemporary literature. This was, I believe, shortlisted even for the Booker Prize. I liked it in the beginning, and then I sort of lost the thread, but I still kind of liked it. I don't really know what to think of this book. I'm going to be honest. A part of me is like, this is genius. And then the part of me was like, I really don't know what's happening anymore. That's, I think, also the point of it. So you have a character, and it starts kind of like mysteriously with an older woman meeting with a younger man, and you're like, what are they to each other? And she kind of questions that. So there's this like meta-analysis of their interaction, of who they are to each other. And the whole book is really about who they are to each other. And she's a director, a theater director, and she's running a play, and sometimes he is her surrogate son, and then you're really wondering whether he is actually her son. And so you have sort of like parallel narratives that run at the same time, and it is supposed to make you question reality, our roles to each other, and things like that. But I know it was just gorgeously written, and I had no difficulty sort of like reading it just because of the prose, but I do remember at the end sort of like having completely lost the thread, and maybe that's on me. So I kind of want to not like impose a verdict on this one, just because usually if I don't understand a book, I'll just be like, yeah, this was shit, but actually I think it's more me than the book. Maybe I'm just being kind, who knows. Okay, the captain is out to lunch and the sailors have taken over the ship, by Charles Bukowski. Man, this was one of my favorite of the year. I guess that's just because it's good old Charles, our good old drunk misogynist poet, doing his thing, talking about how horses run the tracks and he's about to die, and contemplating death and writing about death, all the while talking about how he doesn't give a damn about death, because how else would you survive your life when you're dying? It's part about writing, it's partly about him being old, about being a writer. I love that Charles Bukowski relentlessly keeps writing about being a writer, and to be fair, he has written the best lines about writing. There is this wonderful, wonderful quote in it as well that I want to share. I have it right here, actually. Where did I put it? I'm not in a contest with anybody, have no thoughts about immortality, don't give a damn about it. It's action when you're alive, baby. The gate springing open in the sunlight, the horses plunging through the light, all the jocks, brave little devils in their bright silks, going for it, doing it. The glory is in the motion and the dare. Death be damned. It's today and today and today. Yes. Yes! And what I love about Bukowski and his writing is really how embodied it is and how sort of like visceral it gets. In Praise of Shadows by Tanizaki. This was a beautiful poetic book. I've been wanting to read it for a long time. It's all about the dance of the shadows and the light, very Japanese, very contemplative, and also sort of offers a new explanation of feng shui and how we tend to misunderstand it. It's just a poetic essay about light. Light and shadows are sort of participate in this dance. Maybe I'm just bullshitting my way out of explaining this book just because it's hard to explain books that are about esoteric things like this, but I liked it. Dream Story by Arthur Schnitzler. I remember liking it. I'm very short. It's a novella. It's set in Vienna. It's very weird and kinky. Very weird and kinky, but it's a good classic. I liked it. I feel like this is the kind of book that you can't really explain very well, or really, like, the plot is so kind of weird and out there and odd and bizarre and kind of like, am I dreaming? This could be a dream. Starts with this couple, they have a child, and they sort of like start to reveal their weird kinks or what ifs, past stories, and it opens up Pandora's box and a gate of secret wonders, and then it goes into this weird story and things happen in the underworld of Vienna with masked people, and I'm not sure whether it was talking about an orgy or not, but yeah, you just gotta read it to know. Saturday in Paris, Jack Kerouac. It is about Jack Kerouac vagabonding through Paris. I liked it. It was okay. I keep trying to read Jack Kerouac, and I keep being sort of double about him. There are some sentences that are great. There are some thoughts that are cool, but I feel like he's trying too hard. I don't know. Maybe it's just me that's biased. I used to love The Road. I read The Road at some point when I was in my early 20s. I read it when I was a teenager, and it was kind of like, okay, I don't really get it. And then I read it in my early 20s, and I was like, I love this. And then I read it again a few years after that, after I had started to become a feminist, and I was like, yeah, I don't like him. So I don't know. I'm a bit double, but it's still interesting to read. Finally, Anais Nin, Fire. Fire, a journal of love. Anais Nin is a prominent diarist. It was specifically her diary about the time that she was basically working with Otto Rank as a psychoanalyst. Otto Rank, who was famously her lover at a time. She was still seeing Henry Miller as well. She was doing her thing, and then at some point she met a new lover, Gonzalo, who was this feisty Spanish revolutionary. I don't even know if he was Spanish, but I just know that he was fighting in Spain at the time. And again, Anais Nin and her mercurial aspect and deep observations about herself and her emotions in her life. What I find so interesting about Anais Nin is her such acute self-awareness. She was definitely controversial, especially for her time, very erotically alive and sexual, but sort of grounded in theory and in psychoanalysis and in literature. And she actually is making me want to read D.H. Lawrence, because I know she also wrote a book about D.H. Lawrence. But anyway, this was amazing. Really one of my favorites of the year. It was a bit daunting. I always have this big book fear for some reason. When I start to read a book, I want to commit to it. And I feel I fail myself if I don't manage to pull through. And I also feel like I also fail myself if I don't enjoy it throughout. But this was not one of those cases. This was definitely not one of those. Changing My Mind, Julian Barnes. This is a little essay that he wrote, one of those little penguin collections about changing his mind. It was good. Yeah, I don't know. I don't remember much of it, but I remember it was good. The Position of Spoons and Other Intimacies by Deborah Levi. I read a few of her books. I'm not into her novels for some reason. I'm not really into her novels. I've tried. Jesus, I've tried. I actually only liked her autobiographical 3-part series, which I read a few years ago. Every time I sort of try to read more of her, I'm not really into it. I don't know why. But that's the way it is. I think I rated this 3 stars. I don't even remember what she talked about. But it was basically essays about her life and things like that. Well, I do still have very fond memories of her trilogy. I read When We Cease to Understand the World for the second time ever by Benjamin Labatut. This is one of my favorite books of all time. I remember reading this for the first time in Portugal under the orange blossoms on a hammock. And it was phenomenal. It was one of those, I am in the most perfect place and situation and context right now, very relaxed, idyllic, and I'm reading one of the best books ever. And I wanted to confirm, because for me, my favorite books means that they are books that I would want to revisit throughout my life several times, and that I already have read them several times. I only read this once, and I was like, okay, I want to read it again just to confirm to myself that indeed it is one of my favorite books. It's basically kind of like a hybrid fiction non-fiction. Benjamin Labatut likes to explore the limits of human understanding and human ingenuity and creativity and insight, particularly through breakthroughs in science, in this case at least, breakthroughs in quantum physics, our understanding of the world through quantum physics. And to do that, he often writes about the people themselves, the characters themselves, the real physicists who have advanced our understanding of reality. And so we have here Heisenberg, for example, Schrodinger's cat. What is particular about this is that it's also sort of mixed with completely made up scientists, and you don't really know. So the point is sort of obviously it points back to the title, When We Cease to Understand the World. There comes a point in which our understanding or our sort of human grasp on certain things just start to crumble and don't make sense anymore. And that's the point of quantum physics, I think, right? There are the laws of physics that are immutable, but then from a quantum level, it starts to not make sense anymore. There seems to be no unified theory of that. And I don't know, though. I think that quantum physics is evolving every day, so I have no idea. I like to read about it to make myself feel smarter than I actually am. And then in the end, you realize that you're not. But I think that's particularly of studying physics in general. The best thing we can do is read books about these crazy physicists. And what I found particularly cool also is that this edge between genius and madness, they're just 2 sides of the same coin. Heisenberg seemed to have quite an intense time there in Helgoland on that island. Last Summer in the City, Gianfranco Caligari. This is a novel discovered by Natalia Ginzburg, one of my favorite authors. She revived it. It's about this disenchanted 30-year-old writer, journalist, who sort of like goes through the city of Rome in a summer where everybody's gone, and he falls in love. And it's sort of like this urban wandering kind of novel that contemplates being and existence and love in places like cities where everything seems to be so transient. And maybe, I guess, this is a book about transience itself, and the author is sort of like losing himself in alcohol and beautiful nights. And just like the vibe and the atmosphere of this was beautiful. It was a really enjoyable novel. I think it was one of my favorite novels of this year as well. But I didn't talk about it in my top of the year, so I talk about it now. And I really wanted to read it because Andre Asseman wrote an introduction to the book, and I'm a big fan of Asseman. He wrote Call Me By Your Name. He wrote Call Me By Your Name. That's one of my favorite books as well, so I was like, okay, I'll read this. True Grit by Charles Portis. This was a Western. It's about a 14-year-old girl called Maddie Smith. I think they made a movie out of this. She is avenging the death of her father by this hooligan or this guy that was working for her father somewhere. And she's basically like all this badass 14-year-old being like, yeah, I'm looking for the sheriff in this town, and I want you to help me avenge my father's death and capture this criminal. Then that's what they do, and it's sort of violent and sexy and cool, and this was just like a good fun novel to read. I liked it a lot. I read another Anais Nin, In Favor of the Sensitive Man and Other Essays. I liked this because it was less like centered on herself. It was more centered on her wanderings and her travels and observations about other things, so more like essayistic, and I liked that. I liked that a lot. It was good. Ecstasy, Alex Dimitrov. I love Ecstasy. I loved it. He's one of my favorite contemporary poets. He's on Substack as well. I cannot tell you anything other than just read his poetry. He has this sort of poet persona that is very nostalgic all the time and holding on to things and grappling with love and existence and friendship and closeness, and very contemporary as well. These two books then I'm going to talk about next, which are books that I want to explore in the book club about love. One is Rilke on Love and Other Difficulties, basically a compilation translated and considerations by John J. L. Mood. So this guy compiled some of Rilke's writings and poems about love, and it is phenomenal. I want to read it again. That is why I really want to do this online book club about love. I think that this is, this could be so misunderstood, and there's so many different layers to it. And Rilke was one of those poets that knew exactly what he was talking about. And what I found surprising reading this book was how there were so many feminist angles to his conception of love. And this was like way before like major feminist movements. To quote, because I find this super cool and beautiful and interesting: to take love seriously and to bear and to learn it like a task. This is it that young people need. Like so much else, people have also misunderstood the place of love in life. They have made it into play and pleasure because they thought that play and pleasure were more blissful than work. But there is nothing happier than work, and love, just because it is the extreme happiness, can be nothing else but work. So whoever loves must try to act as if he had a great work. He must be much alone and go into himself and collect himself and hold fast to himself. He must work. He must become something. For believe me, the more one is, the richer is all that one experience. And whoever wants to have a deep love in his life must collect and save for it and gather honey. I love that saying, gather honey. I think one of my favorite quotes from Rilke about love is about two people protecting and guarding each other's solitude, something like that. I will have a better quote for when I talk about it more extensively. And then Octavio Paz, The Double Flame. This is definitely something that I want to read again and again and again throughout my life, most likely. Octavio Paz here takes a more historical approach to love first before delving into what it means for him, and he sort of like traces back the history of love from Romanticism to Japan, 12th century France, modern love novels, and how capitalism has also drastically, like consumer society and capitalism has also drastically changed the landscape of love. He writes about this sort of like trinity that exists in our conception, at least, of love. So you have sexuality, and you have eros, and you have love. So for him, That is what the double flame is. Sexuality, which is this animal impulse, and eros, which is basically sexuality transformed the human imagination, and how those two polarities together create this very specific love, because love kind of requires like tenderness and closeness, but desire also thrives on distance. So it was a very beautiful meditation on that. Talks about time obviously as well. I really want to get more into this book. I really think that this is not the first time I'm going to talk about it. My Private Property, Mary Ruefle. This was my first of hers. I don't remember how this book stumbled upon my life, but it was enjoyable at the time. It was just basically prose poems by Mary Ruefle. And I liked it. We're almost done. 2 more books to talk about. A Man in Love, Karl Ove Knausgård. This was part of my struggle series. It's a 6-part book series. It's crazy, crazy, crazy. The guy, if you don't know about it, he basically, his dad died at some point. He's a writer. He's been trying to be a writer for a long time. He basically writes about the death of his dad. That's the first installment of this series. To write it, he would just have to rely on his memory and sort of like the stream of consciousness. But he would write about his life in a novelistic manner. So this is a book where changing a diaper can feel like an epic. And it's true. I think I said that as well when I talked about it. One of my favorite books of the year. And this is, I think, the second or the third one of the series. And in this one, he meets Linda Bostrom, who becomes his wife and then becomes a father. And he is grappling with the responsibility and fatherhood and what it means to be a good father, and at the same time having this writer ambition. And again, it's one of these books that are about the struggle. That's why he calls it the struggle of being a writer while also being tethered to the real world. And those things are often very difficult to reconcile. And that is the task, I think, of any sort of creative or like even artist of any kind. This was a very interesting angle because I often read this angle from like a feminine perspective, and I liked reading it from his perspective. I think this is a really good experiment. I think what's crazy is that he writes about real people, real life events, and relying on memory, which is obviously very unreliable. It opens up again that question of the place of fiction in memory and reality. And obviously this is the kind of book that triggers and probes and pushes, because people want to know why you write about this, why this specifically. It is so visceral and honest and real. But I think what's cool about it, and what I sort of got from the interviews that I watched of Knausgård talking about writing it, is that there's so many people that can relate to him, because at some point when you remove the filter, when you just say the thing, when you just are completely honest on the page, it's better than fiction. And I think, genuinely, personally, I think that all the best fiction, they are from such a real place, that's why it resonates with people, because they dare to say the things that we don't even dare to say to each other. And that's what I'm interested in. And kudos to Knausgård for that, and I love his books. Last one, Room on the Sea. It's funny that this is the last book I talk about because it's like kind of in the middle of like all the books I read this year. Andre Aciman, I've read so many of his books. From the moment I read Call Me By Your Name, I was like, I'm a fan. Aciman here writes about a love story between two middle-aged, kind of late middle-aged couple, two people. They both have a family and a really long history and a life behind them. They both have vivid lives, but they have like this routine, and they meet each other, and it's about like how love can smack you in the face at any time in your life. Love can just come unexpectedly, and what do you do about that? And a lot of his books and essays really revolve around this like concept of unlived lives or realities or might have beens or what ifs. And I think that his way of metabolizing that, probably, which occupies his mind a lot, is through these novels and these stories. And this was very sweet, very likable book. That's it. I think we've done 60 books. Damn. There's a lot of books I didn't finish, actually. I haven't started as many books that I didn't finish this year. Just because I was like, I don't want to. If I don't like it, I don't like it. Or if it's not the time, it's not the time. What can I say? That is it. Oh, I wanted to talk about this as well. Le Petit Trois, which is a new kind of newspaper. It's basically for the poets and the lovers and the dreamers. It's like if you're into the aesthetics of newspaper, but you don't want to read about the news, exactly like me, this is for you. They are not sponsoring this video at all, but I just wanted to show it because it's just so good. It's too cool. It's nice. I love it. And this one particularly, which one's from November, reviving the old ways, the interior, exterior, the aesthetics of what surrounds us. On the menu, you have art, history, philosophy, food and beverage, and conversations, recommendations, practical magic. Also astrology, obviously. You don't want to miss the astrology part. And there's even a crossword. Oh, it's broken. Anyway, that was it. That was my year in books. I'm glad that I found some authors that I want to keep reading. Kundera, James Salter, Octavio Paz, definitely, Anais Nin, Evermore, and also some beautiful discoveries, some beautiful last-minute discoveries, which reminds me that the best is sometimes just go in a bookstore and not have anything in mind and be like, I don't know, surprise me, world. And there you go. Surprising books. Yeah, hope you had a good new year. Let me know what your recommendation would be. And if you haven't yet, subscribe to join the ride. There's going to be more of this. Here, I will cheers to you with my drink. This tonic drink. I don't know how to say bye now. I don't know. I feel like I have to be a bit more creative. Oh, I know. I want to end with a poem. Okay, to end it just as a special ending, because I feel like it deserves a special ending, because why not? Okay, why not? I want to read the last paragraph, because we're talking a lot about love. Why are you doing that? What is it? What? No, what? What? Tell me. No, tell me now. No, tell me, I'm not waiting. What? Oh, okay. Now good? But now, because we're talking a lot about love, I think it's a good way to end this video, talking about love and quoting love. Love does not defeat death. It is a wager against... Okay, I'm sorry. It's a wager against time and its accidents. Through love, we catch a glimpse in this life of the other life. Not of eternal life, but as I have tried to say in several poems, of pure vitality. Eros. Speaking of the religious experience, Freud refers to an oceanic feeling, the sensation of being enveloped in and rocked by all of existence. There's actually way more, but I think that's enough. Actually. I think that's beautiful enough. With much love. High five. Okay, cut.